The click came first, a cold metallic whisper that froze the air between us. My sister's hand didn't shake. Victoria Grant had always been steady, especially when she was about to do something cruel. The barrel of the gun gleamed under the light from the chandelier, the same one our father had bought the year he finished building the farmhouse. It swayed slightly above my forehead, catching the dust in the air. I could hear the clock ticking on the mantel, slow and deliberate as if counting down. "Sign it, Maddie," she said, her voice calm, almost patient. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." My name sounded foreign in her mouth. The papers lay on the table between us. Deed transfer legal language, my father's signature. His legacy reduced to ink. My hand trembled not from fear of death, but from the realization that the person aiming at me wasn't some stranger breaking into our home. It was my own sister, the girl who used to braid my hair and steal my sweaters. "You'd really kill me for land," I whispered. Her smile was tight like a mask cracking under strain. "Not land. Control. You were never meant to have it." Behind her, our mother Margaret stood with a teacup in hand. The porcelain clinked softly against the saucer as she stared at the floor. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She didn't even blink. "Mom," I said, my voice barely holding. "Tell her to stop." But she just shook her head slightly, like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "You're provoking her again, Madeline." My blood turned cold. The same sentence she had used every time Victoria hit me as a kid, every time I cried about being left out. "You always push her too far." Victoria's finger twitched on the trigger. "This isn't about pushing Mother. This is about ending what should have been over years ago." I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Rage, greed, maybe satisfaction. The space between us felt electric. I took a shallow breath, the air sharp in my chest. My heart thudded against my ribs so hard I thought she could see it. On the table next to the papers sat my phone, its camera quietly recording half buried under the corner of a notepad. The red light blinked unseen, a heartbeat of truth in a room drowning in lies. "If you kill me," I said softly, "you'll lose everything." She tilted her head. "No, little sister. If you don't sign, you'll lose everything." For a second, I saw her the way she used to be, braiding my hair, whispering secrets on stormy nights. Then her finger moved, and that sister was gone forever. The chandelier's light glinted off the gun as her finger tightened. A sound like thunder split the air. Pain flared hot across my shoulder. I fell backward, hitting the hardwood, gasping as the world dimmed around the edges. Family is supposed to protect you. Mine aimed to erase me. 3 weeks earlier, the same living room smelled of lemon polish and peace. The farmhouse had always carried that scent, old wood and faint sweetness from the orchard outside. When I drove in from Boston that morning, the gravel crunched beneath my tires like bones. I hadn't been home since Dad's funeral 6 months ago, and even then I'd left before dessert because Victoria couldn't stop reminding everyone that I had escaped to the city. The truth was simpler. I left because survival demanded distance. The Grant farmhouse stood like a monument to everything I'd tried to outgrow: expectations control and the unspoken rule that my worth was measured by obedience. Dad's passing was supposed to end the fighting. He'd always said the land stays with both my girls. It keeps family together. But death turns promises into weapons when greed takes over. Victoria had already moved back into the house before the funeral flowers wilted. She managed the accounts, handled the taxes, and called herself executor, even though Dad's will named both of us. I received the first letter 2 months later from her lawyer, polite. Tone, cold wording suggesting I sign a transfer for practical management reasons. I ignored it. The second came from Mom, written in her neat cursive. "Sweetheart, let Victoria handle things. You've got your job. She's better at these matters." I'd stared at those words for hours, reading them as what they truly meant. You don't belong here anymore. When I finally returned to Vermont, Victoria greeted me with a smile too bright to be real. "Madeline, you look busy," she said, her voice lined with quiet judgment. Mom stood beside her, hands clasped like she was introducing two strangers. "You girls can sit down after dinner and go over the paperwork," Mom said, avoiding my eyes. "It's just a formality." Dinner was tense, the kind of silence that hums under polite conversation. The silverware clinked too loud, the roast was too perfect. and every sentence carried a hidden edge. Victoria talked about the farm as if it already belonged to her. "We've been thinking of rezoning the orchard," she said, slicing her meat with surgical precision. "It'll be easier to sell the south fields if we do." I looked up. "Sell?" "Dad said the land stays in the family." She laughed softly. "Dad said a lot of things. He also said he trusted me to handle it. He trusted both of us." "You were gone, Maddie." Her tone sharpened. "You left him. You left us." The words hit harder than she intended because they were half true. I had left, but I'd also sent money, checked in, begged Mom to convince him to see a specialist when he got sick. Victoria never mentioned that part. She didn't have to. Mom cut in gently. "Your sister's been through a lot managing this place. Maybe show some gratitude. Gratitude for being erased." I looked around the room that used to feel like home and realized it didn't anymore. Every portrait on the wall seemed to tilt away from me. Dad's smile in the photo above the mantel looked almost like disappointment. I wanted to ask him what to do, but all I could hear was the tick of the same clock that would one day count down to the moment his daughters turned on each other. I forced a smile and said, "Sure, let's talk after dinner." Victoria nodded, that satisfied, rehearsed smile stretching wider. In that instant, I knew she'd already planned everything and I'd walked right into it. The next few days felt like walking through a fog laced with whispers. Every morning, I woke up in my old room, the same floral wallpaper, the same draft from the window Dad always promised to fix. But nothing felt safe anymore. Victoria had taken over his office downstairs, her heels clicking across the hardwood as if she were marking territory. I heard her on the phone most days, smooth, professional, confident, talking to lawyers, accountants, and someone at the county office. When I asked what she was doing, she smiled without looking up. "Just cleaning up Dad's mess," she said. "You wouldn't understand the numbers." I told her I'd studied business before switching to design, but she waved her hand as if brushing off a mosquito. Creative types shouldn't worry about legal things. That was her first strike, making me doubt myself. The second came at breakfast the next day when Mom handed me a cup of coffee and said, "Your sister's under so much stress keeping this house running. You might want to be more supportive." "Supportive," I said. "I just asked for copies of Dad's accounts." "Exactly." She sighed, her tone drenched in patience. "That's not helpful. It's confrontational." My mother could twist a knife without raising her voice. Victoria joined us, perfectly dressed hair, glossy and composed. "You're turning this into a fight, Maddie." Dad wanted peace. "He wanted fairness," I replied. Victoria laughed lightly. "You remember things wrong. He told me he wanted me to make the decisions. You were always too sentimental." That line hit like deja vu. "You remember things wrong." It was what she used to say when I caught her lying to Dad, or when she told our friends I'd cheated on a test I never took. She was rewriting history again, and Mom stood behind her, nodding like a background character in Victoria's script. That night, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine, staring at the orchard, the moonlight cutting silver through the branches. I thought of Dad's voice. "One day, this land will be both of yours," I whispered into the wind. "You'd hate what's happening, wouldn't you?" Somewhere inside, the floorboards creaked. The sound of papers shuffling followed, then silence. I slipped back inside and saw Victoria through the cracked door of Dad's study, flipping through folders. When she noticed me, she shut the drawer too fast, looking for something I asked. "Just bills," she said, but I saw the corner of a document with our father's signature sticking out of her briefcase. That night, I searched the study myself. In Dad's old desk, hidden under an invoice pile, I found a letterhead from a law firm in town, dated 2 weeks before he died. The note inside was short. "Updated will include both daughters equally. To be filed upon confirmation." It was unsigned, maybe a draft, but real. Proof that he meant what he said. I hid it under my mattress. The next morning, I woke to find Mom in my room folding laundry that wasn't hers. "Morning," I said cautiously. "You don't have to do that." She smiled too quickly. "Just helping out." But when she left, the paper was gone. I ran downstairs. Victoria was at the table sipping coffee. "Lose something?" she asked. Her smirk told me everything. That paper didn't mean anything she said before I could speak. It was an old draft. Dad changed his mind. You stole it. You're hysterical. It was proof. She slammed her mug down so hard it splashed. Proof of what? That you were always second best. Mom flinched at her tone but didn't stop her. Victoria, she said softly, maybe give your sister some space? No, Victoria snapped. She needs to understand reality. She can't just waltz back here and claim half of everything like she earned it. My throat burned, but I held my ground. Dad wanted both of us to have it. You can twist everything else, but not that. Victoria leaned close, her breath warm and poisonous. Watch me. I spent that night hiding my phone under the table, recording every word that passed between us. Somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't going to end with words anymore. The confrontation I'd been avoiding arrived on a cold Saturday afternoon when the sky turned the color of iron. Victoria was waiting by the gate as I pulled into the long gravel driveway, her SUV parked sideways like a barricade. The orchard behind her swayed in the wind, branches creaking like restless ghosts. I stepped out of the car, my stomach knotted tight. Move the car, I said. I came to check on the accounts. Dad's lawyer wants documentation of the maintenance fund. Oh, does he? She said, her tone syrupy but her eyes flat. Funny how you suddenly care about Dad's money now that he's gone. I care about his wishes. You care about control. She stepped closer. But you don't get to rewrite history, little sister. You walked away. I felt my hands curl into fists. And you think that means you get to steal. The smile dropped from her face. For a moment there was only the wind and the sharp scent of apples rotting on the ground. Then she lunged. The shove was so sudden it stole my breath. My back slammed against the wooden fence post, the impact exploding down my arm. Pain flared through my wrist as I stumbled, catching myself on the gravel. You don't belong here, she shouted. You never did. I could see the veins in her neck, the raw fury that had been festering for years. Dad didn't mean you when he said both daughters. He meant the one who stayed. You mean the one who obeyed, I hissed. She raised her hand again, but this time I was ready. I stepped back, my heel catching on the uneven ground, and I fell anyway. The jolt sent a crack through my wrist, the pain white-hot blinding. I cried out, clutching it to my chest. Victoria froze for half a second, realizing what she'd done. Then her jaw tightened. You should have stayed gone. Behind her, the front door opened. Mom stood there, her silhouette framed by the light from inside. What on earth is going on? She asked, voice trembling. She attacked me, Victoria said, instantly pointing at me. I was defending myself. That's a lie. I gasped. She shoved me into the fence. Mom's expression flickered between us, then settled into weary disapproval at me. You always make things dramatic, Madeline. Go inside. We'll talk about this calmly. Calmly, I held up my swollen wrist. She broke my arm. Stop exaggerating, Mom said. You're fine. That was the moment I realized my mother would rather believe the lie that kept the family intact than the truth that broke it apart. I drove myself to the ER, clutching the steering wheel with my left hand, every bump in the road sending lightning through my right. The doctor said it was a hairline fracture. He asked what happened. I told him I slipped, because that's what years of silence teaches you to swallow pain like inheritance. But later that night when I lay in the guest room with my wrist wrapped in bandages, the weight of everything pressed down, I heard Victoria laughing downstairs, the sound muffled through the floorboards. Mom's voice joined hers low and approving. Something inside me hardened. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app, typing every detail, date time, what she said, what she did. Then I scrolled through my recent calls and saved the last voicemail from Victoria, the one where she'd said, if you don't cooperate, you'll regret it. I didn't know exactly what I was building, but I knew it was evidence. In the reflection of the dark window, I saw myself not as the weak one, not as the scared child they'd made me believe I was, but as someone preparing for war. When the floor creaked again downstairs, I whispered into the dark, You won't bury me with his memory. That promise became the first clean breath I'd taken in years. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, painting the floor in long golden stripes that felt dishonest against how dark everything had become. My wrist throbbed in its brace, each pulse a reminder of what my sister was capable of. Victoria hummed as she made coffee, her voice sugar-coated but sharp. "You're still here," she said without looking at me. "You heal fast, apparently." I ignored her and poured myself tea. The bruise on my side ached when I lifted the kettle. Mom entered dressed for church, her face painted in polite detachment. "No more fighting today," she said softly. "Your father would be disappointed." "He'd be furious at what's happening," I said. "At both of you." Mom's eyes hardened and she turned away. "You never did understand family duty?" That sentence sealed something inside me. Family duty to her meant silence, obedience, erasure. I finished my tea and went to Dad's old study. The door creaked as I shut it behind me. I placed my phone on the desk, opened the camera app, and propped it behind the stack of books facing the center of the room. The lens caught the door perfectly. Then I pressed record. I didn't know what would happen that day, but I knew something would. My sister couldn't stand not having the last word. By noon, she stormed into the study waving a folder. "You contacted Dad's lawyer." Her voice cracked through the air like a whip. "He called me. He said you asked for copies of the accounts. I have a right to them." "You have nothing," she spat. "You gave that up when you left." I stood, keeping my voice calm. "You're moving money out of the maintenance fund, aren't you?" Her pupils shrank. "Don't start with your conspiracy nonsense. I saw the statements. Then you saw wrong." "Again?" The last word landed like a slap. She closed the distance between us close enough that I could smell her perfumed citrus and something metallic underneath like blood and polish. "You're trying to destroy everything I've built," she hissed. "You want to make me look unstable." "I don't have to. You're doing that on your own." Her hand shot out, slamming the desk. The books rattled. The hidden phone vibrated slightly but kept recording. "You think you can take this from me?" she said, her tone cracking. "I gave up my life for this place." "You took Dad's," I whispered before I could stop myself. The words seemed to suck the air out of the room. Her face twisted and she raised her hand. For a second, I thought she'd hit me again, but she stopped breathing hard, her eyes wild. "Get out," she said finally, "before I do something you can't fix." I left heart-hammering, trying not to show that my hands were shaking. The video had caught everything, her threats, her rage, the truth behind her mask. That night, while they slept, I copied the file to my laptop, then backed it up to an encrypted drive. When I replayed it, the sound of her voice filled my headphones, dripping with venom. "You have nothing. You were always nothing." Hearing it from a screen was different. It made her cruelty feel smaller, contained like evidence instead of trauma. At 2 a.m., I sent an anonymous email to Dad's lawyer attaching the clip and a message. "Please hold this in confidence until I can meet you. It concerns the Grant estate." Then I sat back and stared at the glow of the screen. Outside, the orchard rustled in the wind. The branches tapped against the glass like fingertips reminding me of my father's words. "Protect what's yours." I whispered into the darkness. "I'm trying, Dad." The phone chimed with a new message, Victoria's name flashing across the screen. "We're meeting tomorrow. Don't make it worse for yourself." I read it twice. The tone wasn't a threat anymore. It was a promise. And I knew then she'd realized I had something she couldn't control. The next day arrived wrapped in an eerie stillness, the kind that settles before a thunderstorm. The air in the farmhouse was heavy weighting. My body ached from sleeplessness, and the brace on my wrist rubbed raw against my skin. Mom was in the kitchen stirring oatmeal, the spoon clinking softly against the pot. "Victoria wants to speak with you," she said without looking up. She said it's time to settle this. Her tone was too casual, too rehearsed. My stomach tightened. Settle what I asked. The property, the accounts, everything she said. You can end this nonsense today. I almost laughed. End it by signing everything away. Mom's lips pressed into a thin line. Sometimes peace costs pride. And sometimes silence costs your soul, I said, walking away before she could respond. The study door was open when I reached it. Victoria stood inside back to me, sunlight cutting across her figure like a stage light. The gun lay on the table beside the stack of documents. I stopped cold. "What's that for?" I asked quietly. She turned her expression calm, too calm. Leverage. Her eyes glimmered like polished steel. "You recorded me, didn't you?" My heart kicked hard in my chest. "What are you talking about?" "Don't insult me. You left your laptop open last night. I saw the email. You sent something to Dad's lawyer." My throat closed. He needed to know the truth. The truth, she repeated, almost laughing. "You wouldn't know truth if it crawled into your bed. You always needed to play the victim, didn't you, poor Madeline, the overlooked sister? Poor Madeline who had to run away because she couldn't measure up." She picked up the gun, twirling it lightly in her hand. "You think this is about money. It's about what Dad left to me. Responsibility. Legacy. You couldn't handle either." "You mean control," I said. "You've always needed to own everything, even me." "You were never yours to own," she hissed, stepping closer. "You were the reminder of everything weak in this family. I fixed it once. I'll fix it again." Mom appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "Victoria, please," she whispered. "Put that down." Victoria didn't even glance at her. "She's going to ruin us, Mother. She's going to drag the family name through the mud." "The only one dragging it is you," I said. The tremor in my voice wasn't fear anymore, it was fury. Victoria aimed the gun at me, the muzzle inches from my face. "You should have stayed gone," she said. "Dad always said this land would keep family together. He didn't mean like this." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Even the wind outside seemed to stop. My eyes flicked to the bookshelf where the small red light blinked faintly behind the photo frame, the second camera I'd hidden the night before. My chest tightened with realization. Every word, every gesture, every ounce of her madness was being recorded. "Vic," I said softly, my voice cracking just enough to sound desperate. "You don't want to do this." "Oh, I do," she said. "Because once you're gone, everything can go back to the way it should be." She took another step forward. Mom gasped. "Victoria, stop!" Her finger twitched on the trigger, and for a single second her face softened, almost childlike. I saw the sister who'd once stood beside me under the apple trees laughing free. And then, like a candle snuffed, that version of her was gone. The shot shattered the air. Pain seared through my shoulder, white hot, driving me backward into the wall. The impact stole my breath. I slid down the gun, still echoing in my ears, the scent of gunpowder, thick and metallic. Mom screamed, rushing toward me, but Victoria shoved her aside. "You did this!" she shouted. "You made me do this!" I pressed my good hand against the wound, warm blood seeping through my fingers. Through the blur of tears, I saw the bookshelf light still blinking, a tiny pulse of salvation. I looked up at her, my voice barely a whisper. "You just buried yourself." Victoria froze, confusion flashing across her face. Mom's sobs filled the room, ragged and broken. The gun slipped from Victoria's hand, clattering to the floor. And as my vision dimmed, I held onto one thought like a lifeline. The truth was finally out, and this time I had it on camera. I woke to the sterile hum of hospital machines, the steady beep of a heart monitor, and the sharp smell of disinfectant. My shoulder felt like fire. For a moment, I couldn't remember how I got there. Then the memory hit the gunshot, the flash, Victoria's face twisted in rage. I tried to sit up, but pain tore through me like lightning. A nurse rushed over, pressing a hand gently to my arm. "Easy, Ms. Grant. You're safe. Don't move too fast." Where am I, St. Andrew's Memorial? You've been here 12 hours. You lost a lot of blood." Her words blurred around me until I heard one that froze my breath. "Police." I forced my eyes open wider. "Police." "They were here," she said softly. "Your family called it an accident. Said the gun went off while your sister was cleaning it." A shaky laugh escaped me, half disbelief, half fury. "Of course she did." The nurse's expression softened with something like pity. "They're coming back to talk to you once you're stronger." After she left, I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting them to stop myself from shaking. My phone sat on the bedside table in a clear plastic evidence bag. Someone had turned it in. My heart skipped. Did they know about the recording? About the hidden camera? I turned my head slowly, scanning the room. flowers on the counter. White lilies, my mother's favorite. The door opened quietly. Mom stepped in her perfume, clashing with the sterile air. "Madeline," she said softly, "you look pale. You shouldn't be here." My voice came out rough. "You didn't even call 911. You just watched." She flinched, but didn't deny it. "It was an accident," she whispered. "You startled her. She's devastated." I stared at her, the disbelief almost too big to feel. Devastated. "She shot me." Mom's eyes darted to the hallway as if afraid someone might hear. "Lower your voice. People will misunderstand. You know how rumors spread." The anger rose sharp and cold. "Do you even hear yourself? She tried to kill me." "You're being dramatic," she said, just like she always did when the truth didn't fit her narrative. "You girls have always fought too hard. I told her to apologize." "Apologize." I laughed, the sound harsh and hollow. "She put a bullet in me, Mom." Her eyes glistened, but not with guilt, only shame. "I didn't raise you to bring this family into courtrooms." "No," I said, voice low. "You raised me to stay quiet while she took everything." She turned away, whispering, "Don't let this ruin us." When she left, the air felt colder, emptier. The lilies on the counter wilted under the fluorescent light. Hours passed in fragments, doctors checking vitals, nurses adjusting IVs, pain medicine fogging the edges of my thoughts. But under that haze, one thing sharpened resolve. When the detective came the next morning, his badge glinting under the light, I was ready. "Ms. Grant," he said, flipping open a notebook, "you're lucky to be alive. Your mother says it was an accident, that your sister panicked when you confronted her about the will." "That's a lie," I said evenly. She aimed at me. "On purpose." "You're sure, positive, and I can prove it." He raised an eyebrow. "How?" "There's a camera in the bookshelf of my father's study. It recorded everything." He blinked, then leaned forward. "You're saying there's video evidence of the shooting?" "Yes." He scribbled something quickly. "We'll need to retrieve it." "You'll need a warrant," I said, the bitterness slipping out. "My mother won't let you near that room unless you have one." He gave a small, approving nod. "Understood. We'll handle it." He hesitated, then added, "You did the right thing recording it, but be careful, families like this, they don't go down quietly." After he left, I turned my head toward the window. Snow had started to fall outside, soft flakes gathering on the sill, silent and pure. It reminded me of the orchard, the way snow used to rest on the branches before Victoria shook them bare. I whispered into the stillness, "You're right, detective. They never go down quietly," but for once, I wasn't afraid. Because the truth wasn't trapped in my throat anymore, it was on film, waiting to speak louder than they ever could. The detectives moved faster than I expected. By the second day, they had a warrant and were combing through the farmhouse, cameras flashing, officers moving in and out with quiet precision. I wasn't there, but Detective Raines called me from the scene. "You were right," he said, his voice steady but edged with surprise. "We found the camera exactly where you said, behind the photo frame. It's intact." My chest tightened. "And the footage, we're reviewing it now. I'll call you when we've confirmed." I hung up and stared at the ceiling of the hospital room, my pulse drumming. Each second stretched into an hour. When the call finally came, the air seemed to hold its breath. Ms. Grant Raines said, "The video's clear. We see your sister with the firearm. We see her raise it. We hear the shot." I closed my eyes. My mother. "She's visible in the doorway. Doesn't intervene." His pause told me everything. "It's bad for her." By that evening, the news had already begun to spread through town. "Local heiress under investigation for domestic shooting," the radio anchor said, her voice calm and clinical. "Authorities are reviewing footage allegedly showing an altercation between siblings over a disputed inheritance." I imagined the whispers in grocery stores, the side glances from neighbors who'd known us since birth. The Grants were the kind of family people pretended not to gossip about while doing exactly that. Victoria's lawyer called the hospital the next morning. "Madeline," he said, his tone rehearsed. "Your sister regrets the misunderstanding. She'd like to arrange a private settlement to keep this from escalating." "A misunderstanding." I repeated, my voice sharp. "She shot me." "There's no need for hostility," he said smoothly. "If this goes to court, it will destroy your family's reputation. Then maybe it should." I hung up. Hours later, Detective Raines returned in person. He brought copies of the footage, one for evidence, one for my lawyer. He set the tablet on my lap, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to watch this if you don't want to. I need to." The clip began with the sound of footsteps and the scrape of a chair. Victoria's voice filled the room, confident, cruel, and familiar. Every word was like a knife reopened. I watched her pick up the gun, watched the flash, heard my mother scream. I flinched, even though I knew it was coming. When the screen went black, I realized I'd been holding my breath. "It's enough," Raines said. "She can't claim it was an accident anymore. What happens now will bring charges: attempted murder, unlawful possession, intent to defraud. As for your mother," he hesitated, "accessory after the fact, likely. The DA will decide." I turned my gaze to the window where the snow had turned to rain. The sound of it against the glass felt cleansing somehow. "Do it," I said quietly. "All of it." That night, I lay awake listening to the storm. Thunder rolled in the distance, low and constant. I thought about Victoria in that old house, pacing, realizing her empire was collapsing, and Mom probably sitting at the kitchen table, hands folded, pretending everything was fine while her world caved in. 2 days later, I was discharged. My shoulder still ached, but I felt steady. My lawyer, Andrea Blake, met me in her downtown office papers spread across the desk. "The DA wants to move fast," she said. "The evidence is airtight and the media's circling. This case is going to get attention." "Let it," I said. "Maybe it's time people saw what family abuse really looks like." Andrea smiled faintly. "Then you'd better be ready. Once this goes public, there's no turning back." I nodded. I've spent my whole life turning back. Not this time. As I left her office, the late afternoon light caught the reflection of the courthouse across the street, the same steps where I would soon face my sister. I stopped for a moment, watching the flags ripple in the wind, and felt something I hadn't in months control. Justice wasn't coming quietly, and neither was I. The courthouse in Burlington stood cold and gray against the January sky, the kind of day where breath fogged like ghosts. I walked up the stone steps slowly, each movement tugging at the stitches in my shoulder. My lawyer, Andrea Blake, matched my pace, her heels clicking with purpose. "Stay calm, speak clearly, and let the evidence do the heavy lifting," she said. "They'll try to paint you as emotional. Don't give them that satisfaction." Inside the courtroom smelled faintly of wood polish and nerves. Reporters lined the back row, their pens ready, their eyes hungry. Victoria sat at the defense table in a cream blazer, her hair pulled back in a perfect bun. She looked composed, even regal, as if she'd walked into a board meeting instead of a criminal hearing. Mom sat behind, her lips pressed so tight they were almost white. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. "Case 2147, State of Vermont versus Victoria Grant," the clerk announced. My pulse pounded. The prosecutor started with the video. They dimmed the lights and the footage flickered onto the courtroom screen. The audio was crisp, Victoria's voice slicing through the silence like a blade. "You were never meant to have it." The gun appeared in her hand, the barrel raised. My own scream echoed faintly before the shot cut everything off. No one breathed. When the video ended, the judge leaned back slowly. "Ms. Grant," he said, his tone grave. "How do you explain this?" Victoria's lawyer rose. "Your Honor, this was a moment of emotional distress, not premeditation. My client was provoked." Andrea stood. Provoked, she repeated, her voice sharp. She fired a gun at her unarmed sister. "That's not emotion, that's intent." She walked to the table, holding up printed bank records. And it wasn't just violence, it was theft. Over $180,000 siphoned from estate accounts into Ms. Grant's private holdings. Victoria's jaw tightened, but her eyes stayed fixed ahead. Andrea continued. "And here we have her mother." Mrs. Margaret Grant documented transferring funds after the incident in what appears to be an attempt to cover her daughter's tracks. Mom's hand flew to her chest. "That's not true," she whispered, but it was too late. The courtroom had already turned toward her, eyes sharp with judgment. When it was my turn to speak, the judge nodded gently. "Ms. Madeline Grant, you may take the stand." I stood every step toward the witness box, a battle between fear and resolve. My hand trembled slightly as I took the oath. Andrea smiled, faintly reassuring. "Ms. Grant," the prosecutor said, "can you describe the events of that day?" I took a breath. My sister called me to the study to sign property transfer papers. I refused. She accused me of betrayal. I reminded her the land was ours equally. That's when she raised the gun. Did your mother attempt to intervene? No, I said, my throat tightening. She told me not to provoke her. And what did you do after you were shot? I pressed my hand to the wound, crawled toward the door, and told her she'd buried herself, because I knew the camera was recording. Andrea approached. Madeline, why did you record her? Because for years no one believed me. Not about the bruises, not about the money, not about the lies. I needed the truth to have a voice louder than theirs. The courtroom was silent again, only the faint sound of rain tapping against the high windows. Victoria's expression cracked for the first time, the calm slipping from her face like old paint. The prosecutor nodded. No further questions. Victoria's lawyer tried to rattle me on cross, asking if I'd exaggerated if I'd provoked her. I stayed steady. The camera doesn't exaggerate, I said. It doesn't provoke. It records. By the time I stepped down, the judge's expression had changed from neutral to grim certainty. When the verdict came, it landed like thunder. Guilty on all counts. Gasps rippled through the room. Mom's hand slipped from Victoria's shoulder. My sister sat frozen, her eyes darting to me, then to the guards who stepped forward. As they cuffed her wrists, the same sound echoed that had once haunted me, the metallic click of control. But this time, it wasn't hers. It was mine. When the gavel struck, it sounded like the final crack in the ice that had held me prisoner for years. The courtroom erupted into murmurs, reporters rushing out with phones in hand, whispers of guilty rolling through the benches like a tide. I stood still numb, watching as the bailiff took Victoria by the arm. Her eyes met mine once, sharp with disbelief, then fell away. The woman who'd once towered over me with the power to hurt now looked small, diminished, as if the weight of her own choices had hollowed her out from the inside. Mom remained seated, her hand frozen mid-reach, eyes wide but glassy. When she finally rose, her voice cracked like brittle porcelain. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "You could have stopped it." I turned toward her slowly. "You're right," I said quietly. "I could have stopped it years ago if you'd let me speak. But you never wanted the truth. Just silence." Her face broke into something between sorrow and fury. "She's still your sister." "She was," I said, until she pulled the trigger. Andrea guided me toward the hallway as deputies led Victoria through the side door cuffs gleaming under fluorescent light. The sound of the locks snapping shut echoed down the corridor. That sharp click, once the sound of fear, now felt like freedom. Outside, cameras flashed, reporters shouting questions I didn't answer. I just kept walking, my shoulder aching with every heartbeat but my steps steady. The winter air hit my face like a baptism. For the first time in months, I could breathe without the weight of their secrets pressing on my chest. Over the next few weeks, the story spread beyond Vermont. Sister shoots, sibling over inheritance. Hidden camera exposes truth. Headlines like that appeared in every major paper. Strangers sent letters, some thanking me for standing up, others sharing their own stories of family betrayal. It was strange, realizing how many people lived in quiet prisons built by those they loved. The house went into court-ordered liquidation, and the estate was divided according to Dad's last valid will, the one she'd tried to destroy. My half of the inheritance arrived in a plain envelope with the state seal. No fanfare, just numbers and finality. I didn't feel rich. I felt untethered. Mom refused to see me again. Through the lawyer, she sent a single message. "You've ruined this family." I didn't reply. You can't ruin what was already rotting. I used part of the settlement to pay medical bills and the rest to leave Vermont behind. I rented a small apartment near the coast in Maine, where the air smelled of salt and freedom. At night, the waves crashed against the rocks, steady and unforgiving, and I slept without waking in fear. Andrea called one evening with an update. 15 years, she said, with no possibility of parole for the first 10. Your mother's cooperation plea got her probation, but she's barred from managing any finances tied to the estate. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. "Thank you," I said, "for everything." "You earned this," she replied. That night I opened my laptop and rewatched the video, the same clip that had ended it all. It still made my stomach twist, but I no longer flinched. I closed it halfway through and whispered, "Rest now, Dad. It's done." Spring came early that year. The pain in my shoulder faded to a dull ache, like an old scar reminding me how close I'd come to disappearing. I started volunteering with a women's shelter in town, helping others document their abuse, showing them how to gather evidence, how to be heard. Each story I heard carried echoes of mine, but each one ended differently because I could help them find their proof. One afternoon, a counselor asked if I'd ever forgive my family. I thought about the orchard, the gun, the sound of the shot, and the years of silence that came before it. Forgive, I said softly. Maybe. But forget never. Forgetting is how they win. When I left the center that evening, the sky was streaked with pink and gold. The sea wind tangled in my hair. I realized I was no longer walking away from the past. I was walking toward something new. Something mine. Months passed, and the rhythm of life began to soften around me. The mornings were slow now, coffee steaming on the balcony, gulls calling over the gray Atlantic, the kind of quiet that used to feel like loneliness, but now felt like peace. The scar on my shoulder had faded to a thin, pale line. Some nights it still ached when the weather turned cold, but the pain no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a warning of what I'd survived and what I'd never allow again. I'd rented a small studio above a bookstore run by an older couple who treated me like family without ever asking questions. The first time Mrs. Porter handed me a stack of returned books to reshelve, she said, "You've got careful hands, dear. You move like someone who's lost things." She didn't mean it unkindly. She meant she could see the war still echoing behind my eyes. Work became therapy. I painted again for the first time since college, letting the colors bleed and clash on canvas until something true emerged. It was chaos, beauty, and release all at once. Sometimes I painted the orchard not as it had been, but as I imagined it could have been. No fences, no shadows, just open fields under clean light. In the afternoons, I volunteered at the women's shelter downtown. At first, I kept my story hidden, content to pour tea and listen. But one night, a woman with a split lip and trembling hands sat across from me and whispered, "He says I'm crazy," that no one would believe me. Something inside me snapped open. I leaned forward and said, "That's what they count on our silence. Start documenting everything. Dates, words, bruises. Truth is powerful when you trap it on tape." She looked at me like I'd handed her a weapon. Maybe I had. That night, the shelter director, Carla, asked if I'd ever speak publicly. "You have a voice people will listen to," she said. "Women your age, older women, they'll hear themselves in you." The thought terrified me. For years, my voice had been something to survive, not to share. But a few weeks later, I agreed to speak at a community event. The auditorium wasn't large, maybe 50 people. The lights were dim, the air thick with anticipation. When I stepped up to the microphone, my hands shook. I started simply, "My name is Madeline Grant, and last year, my sister pointed a gun at me over our father's inheritance." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "She shot me," I continued, and my mother said I provoked it. But what saved me wasn't luck, it was evidence. A single, hidden camera. I told them how the justice system had seen what family refused to see. How truth, once captured, becomes armor. When I finished, the applause wasn't loud. It was soft, rising like waves, people crying, quietly nodding, touching each other's hands. I realized then that survival isn't private. It's communal. It's what happens when one person's voice makes another feel less alone. After the talk, a woman about my mother's age approached me. "You remind me of my daughter," she said, eyes wet. I wish I'd listened to her sooner. She pressed a folded note into my palm and walked away. Inside it said, "Thank you for not being silent." That night, as I sat on my balcony, watching the tide roll in, I thought of Dad again. He used to say, "Justice doesn't grow on its own, kiddo. You have to tend it like a field." I smiled through tears because I finally understood. I wasn't tending an orchard anymore. I was tending truth. I began keeping a journal not to remember the pain, but to chart the healing. Each entry started the same way, still standing. One morning, I got a letter forwarded from the prison. It was from Victoria. The handwriting was hers, sharp and slanted. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope one day you'll stop hating me enough to let me fade." I folded it carefully and slid it into the back of my journal without replying. She was fading already. When I looked at the horizon, the sun was climbing above the water, bright and unflinching. For the first time, the future didn't scare me. It felt wide, open, earned. A full year passed before I stepped foot back in Vermont. The courthouse stood exactly as it had the day of the verdict, cold, dignified, indifferent, but the town around it seemed smaller somehow. Or maybe I had just grown. I wasn't here for confrontation. I came for closure. The orchard had been sold to a conservation trust just like Dad once hoped. The new owners turned it into a community farm open to local families and schools. When I parked by the old gate, children were laughing among the apple trees. Their voices floated through the crisp air, pure and bright. For a moment, I let myself close my eyes and imagine Dad standing beside me, his hand resting on my shoulder, his voice soft. "You did it, Maddie. You kept it alive in the only way that mattered." The farmhouse itself stood quiet and sun-bleached. The curtains were gone, the rooms empty. Through the window, I could see where the bullet had struck the wall, a small, rough scar near the fireplace. I reached out, touching the glass between us. It didn't hurt anymore. It just reminded me that even wounds can become markers of survival. A car pulled into the drive behind me. Andrea stepped out, her coat fluttering in the wind. "Didn't think I'd find you here," she said. "You look good." "I feel good," I said. "Better than I ever thought I would." She nodded toward the orchard. "They're dedicating the field to your father this spring. The Grant Garden, they're calling it." My throat tightened. He'd like that. "He'd be proud of you," she said quietly. We walked together for a while, the air smelling faintly of sap and thawing earth. When we reached the edge of the property, she stopped. "You ever going to tell your story beyond the shelters?" I hesitated. "Maybe. It's not just mine anymore. It belongs to anyone who's ever been told to stay quiet." That night, back in Maine, I opened my laptop and began to write not as evidence, not as defense, but as truth. The words came slow at first, then faster. There was a day my sister pointed a gun at me and the world went silent. But what broke the silence was not the sound of the shot. It was the sound of me choosing to survive. The memoir took 6 months to finish. When it was published, it wasn't a bestseller, but it found its people, the women in small towns, the men who'd lost siblings to greed, the sons and daughters who'd been told to forget what hurt them. Letters came from everywhere. Some thanked me. Some confessed things they'd never said aloud. One woman wrote, "You helped me press record." That one I kept pinned to my wall. Victoria never wrote again. Through Andrea, I learned she'd been transferred to a lower security facility after a year of good behavior. Mom moved to Florida to live with an aunt. I didn't follow their stories anymore. Some ghosts lose interest once you stop feeding them. 2 years later, the shelter invited me to speak at a statewide conference on family abuse and financial control. Standing under those bright lights, I realized I wasn't trembling this time. I looked out at the faces, tired, hopeful, scarred, surviving, and I began. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means reclaiming your story from the people who tried to rewrite it for you. Afterward, a young woman approached me clutching a small recorder. "I hid this under my bed last night," she whispered. "It's got proof." I smiled and placed a hand on hers. "Then you just built your way out." When I drove home that evening, the sun was setting behind the Atlantic, spilling gold across the water. I rolled the window down, letting the wind whip through my hair, the scent of salt and pine filling the car. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the one who'd knelt on a farmhouse floor, bleeding and terrified. She was steady, scarred, and alive. As the light turned green, I whispered, still standing, and drove toward the horizon where the sky broke open into light. The story had begun with violence, but it ended here with freedom. And this time, the silence wasn't fear. It was peace.